I'm here with Jake Puhl, who is the CEO of the Dentist Entrepreneur Organization, and welcome, Jake, to our studios here in Tampa. The question I have for you, as many of these DSOs are scaling up, is at what point do we involve an executive team or a C-suite team? And again, we've listened to the many experts in this area. As what's the right? Is it 10 locations? Is it revenue? When is it the right time to bring professional C-suite executives, a CFO, a COO? What have you seen in the industry that's happening? When are these groups kind of making that transition over?
Yeah, another interesting one. As you know, we bring a lot of different folks who've done it in a lot of different ways. And I hate to keep harping on the same thing, but it has been done different every single time.
Sure.
So when it comes to building your executive team, we've seen folks that, first of all, is when do you bring in your executive team? First of all, what's the definition of an executive team? What is an executive? For me, I would hold off on those titles because those titles sometimes bring very large salaries, right?
Sure.
So you're looking for skill sets, not necessarily titles. But the question is, when you start bringing in professionals, like you said, who are experienced, right?
Sure.
And which ones do you bring in, right? How do you know? So you're constantly building your org chart. You're constantly looking for the next need. We do find usually about above 50 employees. Once you start looking above 50 employees, you start to think about bringing in some really experienced people. Definitely over 75 or 100 employees.
Sure.
That's kind of the trend we've seen. And whether you call them an executive or not, it doesn't really matter. You're looking for very skilled people, a lot of times who have been there and done that, who have done
Sure.
what you're trying to accomplish,
Sure.
and have a track record. So that's the first thing to start with, I think.
Is HR kind of becoming a big issue? Do you bring the HR folks first and maybe financial guys first?
So again, what we've seen folks wait past 100 employees before they hire an HR. In fact, this is a conversation going on right now with some of our members. We've seen folks hire an HR person in between 40 and 50 employees. Again, it depends on what's your biggest need. Are you struggling operationally? Do you have fires every day and it's just operating? You have no systems, you have no nothing. But you have decent people and a decent culture.
Sure.
You have both of those needs. Obviously, you'd hire them both if you could.
Absolutely.
But you might start with somebody that's operational. If your operations are decent and people generally have time and you're not putting out fires, then maybe you look at HR. But certainly, I will tell you, I haven't heard anyone say that they've hired their HR person too early.
Too early.
Yeah, it's always it seems to be a good hire at that time.
And the CFO kind of puts again the numbers in place, right? As you are, we've talked to folks at Tusk, for example, of how important it is to build good, robust financial reporting systems that not only, that are important for investors as they come in. So a CFO kind of can help with that, right?
Well, for sure. I mean, this is one of the aspects I think most growing small groups are overlooking. And it's this idea of looking at your hiring as a return on investment versus a cost. So you hire a financial person and they come in and they save you 2 percentage points on supplies. They improve your billing cycle potentially, or they find people that will. And,
Sure.
They identify a few leaking, holes in your bucket, and they paid for themselves in the
Right.
first year. Right. So again, another one that almost can't be hired soon enough, at least in a fractional aspect, is somebody that is looking at your numbers and accountable for the money at the end of the day.
And you don't have to necessarily call them a CFO. You could call them controller, or you could call them, the chief accountant, or whatever you want to call them. But you want somebody looking at the books, correct?
Yeah, somebody whose name is on the line if the money goes wrong. So yeah, typically go from bookkeeper, and then you hire a controller, and then you hire a CFO or a fractional CFO or whatever you want to call that. But you would eventually increase the skill set.
Have you seen this fractional executives at DSOs now? Because if you don't want a full-time CFO or a full-time controller or a full-time COO, are you able to go out there now and find people who will do this in fractions?
Well, thinking it's a need and finding it are two different things. Okay. It's definitely a need. There are a few kind of fractional, and they don't really call themselves CFOs. There's a lot of accounting firms that will play that role. Yeah, that have gained those competencies and will play that role. There's a lot of controllers out there who will do that. It's not easy. Some people have their family members who will do that. They've got a family member who's really good at finance, and they'll on a fractional basis. It's certainly not easy, but it is very much needed.
So the moral of the story is, I guess, as you start scaling in terms of either employees, maybe 40, 50 employees, these needs become important, and getting these folks on board. So maybe at five or six practices, looking, all right, 50 employees, maybe 10 at the most. And that's kind of the magic number of, okay, we've got 10 practices, we've got over 50 employees. We need to start thinking about our C-suite team, whether we call them C-suite or not, that doesn't matter, but we need to start thinking ahead and not after the fact when problems arise.
Here's what I will give you a very tactical recommendation for anyone listening. You take your org chart. First of all, you have an org chart really outlined, dialed in, and be looking at that all the time and studying it.
Sure. And
then you create your org chart at your next step, right? What's it going to look like if you double or when you go from 5 practices? And then you start hiring for that new org chart, because that is, you literally need, it's like a butterfly from a caterpillar to a butterfly. You need to be a completely different business at double the revenue. So start hiring into that new org chart.
Instead of being reactive to, okay, I need to solve these problems, let me get these people on board, you need to think about, okay, what my org chart looks like 2 years, 3 years down the line, and then start looking at some hires, right? You don't have to hire them right away, but okay, in the fall of 2018, I'm going to hire a CFO, and you start looking now.
Exactly, and figuring out in that new org chart who's going to make the biggest difference the quickest, and who's going to pay for themselves the quickest, who's going to move the needle the quickest. And that's a general principle on how to hire and scale at the same time.
Right, because sometimes you feel, as you said earlier, like it's, oh my God, it's going to cost me so much money, it's going to increase my overhead. But at the end of the day, because you don't know what the benefits are, because you cannot measure them, you feel that there is no cost benefit. But there is a benefit of hiring, especially people who are more than, and you can construct, right? You can design ways to figure out what the ROI is on anybody by looking at the impact that they make. So this is fascinating. I'm as DSOs kind of evolved through that process of going through multiple locations, getting the right executives involved at the right time before you need them is vital. So thank you for this discussion, and we'll continue the dialogue.
Thanks,
thank you so much.